right, let's kick off and get started. Hi everybody, welcome to Open House. Today we're talking about mastering mobile app measurement with Noa Gutterman, which is amazing. Noa, we talk a little bit about Noa, but Noa's awesome, terrific apps marketer and just growth marketer generally. For quick background, next episode we'll be chatting with fractional CMO and former SVP of marketing at Tonal, Rob Webb. He'll be discuss growth and emerging measurement trends. Rob is also a terrific person to give great point of view. Very, very critical person and very, very skeptical. I think that skepticism comes through and is something that I always love talking to Rob, so I'm sure the group will as well. But today we're talking to Noa. So just kind of my quick background with Noa, and then let you take it. Is we got connected a couple of years ago now, and I think, in working with you over these years, we've seen just how thoughtful, detail-oriented, and technical of a marketer you are. And I think really have a lot to contribute to the broader community. So I'd love for you to do a quick intro for yourself.
Yeah, absolutely. Hi, everyone. Lovely to be here. Thank you both so much for having me. Like Zach said, my name is Noa. That's the easy part. I'm the Senior Director of User Acquisition at TextNow, which is a very fancy way of saying anything we do to bring users through our front door, I am accountable for. I live in Brooklyn, New York. What else about me? I'm an Aries, and I love exploring. I'm always trying to eat something new, do something new, and New York's the perfect place for that.
Well, that's good. Great segue into the concept of experimentation. So, Noa, you were one of our very first customers at House. And one of the things that, even when I was founding the company, if I think about what happened a few years ago versus today, a few years ago, I didn't know anyone would care about incrementality other than like the Netflixes of the world and the bookings of the world. It was not the buzzword or kind of the mainstream requirement that marketers are looking for today. Where did you first learn about incrementality and kind of why was it so important to you?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, a bit about my background. I have a rather untraditional, I think, user acquisition background in the sense that I wasn't always in-house. I actually did a couple years agency side. And when I was working at the agencies between 2017 and 2020, roughly, I got to work across such a wide variety of clients, both in terms of my own book and the people that I managed their clients. And what I learned across that big swath of companies, big, small, startups, enterprise companies, was that measurement was a massive, massive challenge that nobody had a perfect answer to. And I got to experience MMM models and different types of testing and last touch and multi-touch. And ultimately, when I went back in-house in 2020, and iOS 14.5 happened, I went to an agency of mine at the time, and I said, I need to figure out measurement. I want to talk to the smartest people that y'all know about measurement and hear what they're doing. And they ended up introducing me to you at the time. I don't think there was a product, right? This was pre-product. You guys were building it. And I picked your brain about it. And I realized that you were not only one of the best people to talk to about measurement, but you were building a product that was created for the challenges that I was having, being a decision maker with a pile of money and trying to be a responsible steward of that money and spend it to the best of my abilities. And it felt like incrementality testing was kind of the key that would unlock that door to smart and responsible testing. So I had heard about incrementality testing before, but I had never kind of seen it put forth in a really comprehensive, easy to understand way for marketers before. It had always been this data science thing, and I had never seen it packaged up for marketers. So when I got connected with you and heard about the House product, for me, it was like a slam dunk. I think I signed a contract before the product was available for me to use because I was just so excited that this had seemed like and was kind of the answer to the questions that I was having.
That's amazing. Yeah, I think if you go back in time, it was a very different era for the company where it was, folks like myself and Joe leads applied science at House who, we had done tons of these experiments on our own and with customers, but it was definitely pre-product. Very, very different era today.
Yeah. And we just signed our third contract together. So that's how I date our working relationship is by the number of contracts. So that was at a prior company. We did one together, and now we've done two at my current company.
Which is awesome.
No, I wanted to jump in here, and I was particularly excited about this because when I made the transition from Netflix to Quibi, which was Netflix web sign up, to Quibi, which was a mobile app, very much mobile app based company, I realized and learned very quickly that it's an entirely different ecosystem. Like vendors, kind of must use vendors started popping up that I had never heard of after being in growth for a decade. So I'm curious from your perspective, like, as a mobile app, what does your tech stack look like? And what are kind of some unique elements of the tech stack being a mobile app?
Absolutely. Yeah, I think the most basic thing you have to think about when you think about mobile apps is that you need what's called an MMP, or mobile measurement partner. It's essentially the equivalent of Google Analytics or GA4, but for mobile apps. Essentially, it's the intermediary between the ad platforms, the Facebooks, the Googles of the world, and your internal post-install data. And that MMP sits between the two and tells you how many installs you get, where you got them from, how much you spend in particular channels. Now, there are all sorts of bells and whistles that the MMPs have now, but you have to have an MMP to do anything in the mobile app world. So that's kind of the first cornerstone of our tech stack. We use an MMP called Adjust, but there are several ones out there. On top of that, I always want to layer different types of measurement and testing capabilities. So obviously we work with y'all for our incrementality testing. We also have a couple different agencies that bring their own tech stack that are specific to harder to measure channel. So we use a CTV partner that has their own kind of piece of tech that sits on top of our MMP that cross-references IP address data to match a user's device with a user sign up. We have different kind of platforms that help us understand ad performance, creative testing, et cetera. But then the new thing that I guess I'm excited about is that we are getting back into web. I feel like with marketing, everything that's old becomes new again. The cycle kind of repeats every 10 years. And because of the loss of user level data on mobile, and because web seems to be having this resurgence, we're actually reinvesting in our website. So we rebuilt our website. We're about to have web registration re-added in. And so we're going to go from just being a mobile app to being a company that cares about web to app journeys. So I'd imagine in a couple of weeks, I'm going to come to y'all and say, who are the best people that you work with that do web to app measurement? Because now it's kind of a burning question for me.
That's super interesting. Is that now, whereas we were trying to remove friction from a sign up experience, iOS 14.5 has made it such that we need to go back into web to actually track it so fast. Yeah. So before pre you guys deciding to create a web registration, you didn't use Google Analytics at all.
That's correct.
Fair? That's so correct. Yeah, that was it's just so wild that just such the cornerstone of measurement is just really not relevant for app-based marketers.
I know, it's so wild. Now GA4, I went into it the other day. I barely recognize it. I miss universal analytics because it's been a while since I've had to deal with web data.
Yeah, you are not alone in that. Fascinating. So one thing I also wanted to talk to you about is super relevant for web advertisers who are trying to grapple with PMAX right now. Everybody's testing it. Everybody's talking about it. Folks are very upset. They feel like they've lost control and visibility into search campaigns. Some of their highest spending channels, they feel like they are now just kind of forced to give the system some assets and a budget, and that they've really lost all ability to optimize this channel. And I've been saying for a bit that mobile apps have been dealing with this for years. Like, there has been no other alternative to this form of black box buying. And so I'm curious from your perspective, like, tell me about your general POV on Google's universal app campaigns. Now I believe it's called ACI, so you can educate us there, and how you think about it, how it works in your mix, and what we can learn is as we kind of embark on this PMAX journey from what you all have been experiencing for years here.
Well, PMAX advertisers, welcome to my world. We have been here for a while. It's a challenge, right? And unfortunately, we live in a world where Google, Apple, other folks make decisions that then we have to figure out how to work within. So not going to lie to you and say it's perfectly easy, but those of us who live in the mobile app universe have been here for a while. So let's just set this stage a little bit. In Google's formerly universal app campaigns, as I call them, the artist formerly known as UAC, but is now called ACI, we do not get any control at all over the keywords, that we rank for, the placements where ads show up, the mix of brand versus non-brand. We are basically putting money into a black box and out comes installs. And we cannot control where, what those ads say, how we rank, our brand share of voice. We don't get any control. And it's been challenging. So to give you some context and kind of a practical application for those of you who are maybe like scratching your heads thinking like, what is she talking about? When I joined TextNow about 1.5 years ago, approximately 80% of our marketing dollars were going towards Google, at the time, universal app campaigns. Again, no control, didn't know anything. We were just putting money in, getting users out. And I had a pretty strong hunch from my prior experiences, both with incrementality testing with y'all and just at other companies, that that amount of spend was too much. I really felt that we were had reached that point of diminishing returns, and we were almost certainly eating into our organic volume. We were cannibalizing, because you can't spend that much money on your brand terms forever and increase that money forever and forever and forever, and not put any other ads into the world and expect those to just perpetually give you more volume. I don't know, maybe you can if you're like Nike, but at TextNow, we couldn't do that. There's a limit on the amount of Google spend we can have. And we onboarded you guys really quickly. You were my first partner that I brought on. And we ran several tests on Google, some of them in partnership with Google, some of them on our own, really just to get a couple different data points to validate. Google was able on the back end to give us some help excluding our brand terms in certain tests, not excluding our brand terms in other tests, so we could get a sense for the incremental impact of Google non-brand versus Google brand. And ultimately what came out of that is that our Google campaigns net were only about 30% incremental. Now that meant that we were beyond a shadow of a doubt wasting money. We could spend less and still get the same results. Ultimately, that's what we did. We pulled way back with our Google ad spend versus what we said we were going to do this year, got to a place where we were getting the same results with about 70% less spend. And ultimately, if I were to trend that out over the course of the year and say what I told finance at the beginning of the year I was going to spend versus now what we're able to spend and still deliver the same results, we're saving close to $4 million. And that right there is such a perfect example for me of the impact of incrementality testing. I saved $4 million and I'm getting the same results. Like for me, that is exactly what I want to be doing with this testing, because that makes me a responsible steward of TextNow's money, but that also makes me a great marketer, because I'm either able to save the company close to $4 million or repurpose those dollars into another more incremental channel.
That's awesome.
I mean,
Yeah.
that's like so amazing.
Yeah.
Yeah, like, and you know, it's funny, like I'll say from my time at Google, I worked with a lot of the, very largest apps advertisers, and a lot of them wouldn't, even though the whole world was kind of, the gravitational force was towards UAC, they had such embedded skepticism of what ad networks you'd be showing on. They're like, oh, we're just not going to buy it. And again, like there were subsets of customers who could kind of believe that. And I don't think that was, for most of the ecosystem, it is just such an efficient way to buy, buy app installs and to, efficiently cost cut. So that's a really amazing insight. But something I'm curious about is, generally when you think of the quality of inventory, there's this long-term question of, are these the right types of customers? Are we just buying cheap app downloads? Like, and the visibility can be lost. I'm curious, how do you think about measuring long-term value in a business, in a world where, visibility kind of begins and ends with the install, and then obviously you have MMPs for other parts of the journey, but that I'm sure is like the optimization event. So I'm just curious how you think through that.
Exactly. I would say like there's such a big challenge for mobile apps, which is how do you get efficient acquisition, but also high value acquisition. And sometimes super efficient acquisition is super low value. And so I really do think it's about event optimization and creative testing. So for us on Google, we've done a massive amount of event testing where we are feeding the Google algorithm more and more information about high value customers and really leveraging what Google is best at, which is an awesome algorithm to go out and find more high value customers, right? I think One of the hardest parts about being a marketer is understanding what platforms, what partners, et cetera, what they're good at and what they're not good at, and figuring out when to trust and when to have skepticism. So for me, I have a ton of skepticism with Google around their inventory, around incrementality, around the placements, but I actually have a lot of trust that their algorithm is like pretty good at bringing me high quality users if I feed it the right signals. So we're on what now, our 6th event optimization test of trying to feed it a different signal and seeing if it brings us a higher value user over time than the prior test. And we're working our way up to, in Q4, we're going to do what I think a lot of web advertisers do, called TROAS bidding, or in the case of mobile apps, it's called a value-based bidding, or VBB. We're working up to that, where we will be feeding dynamic signals to the Google algorithm on user value. That doesn't work as well on other platforms, where either the algorithm is not as good, the spend is not as good to do that aggressive type of testing, or they just don't take those events because there are intricacies to user level data with privacy signals for iOS. So for other channels, we do signals that are higher up in our funnel, that are past install, but are not quite as deep as like a 7-day user value. Typically that's like registration, profile completion, completing a certain number of actions within the first 24 hours post-install. We feed those events back through Adjust, through our MMP, to the different ad platforms. And then we're constantly measuring value per individual ad campaign per channel within our own tech stack, our own ecosystem, on a rolling 7-day basis. So on the 7th day post-install, I can tell you what the predicted value is of that user that was acquired through whatever channel for the next 5 years. Now we have really stable retention curves. So for us, it's pretty easy to predict that user's value. That might not be as true at other companies. But for us, it's just this constant iterative dance where we say what we're going to spend, we run that amount of spend for a week, we reevaluate based on the predicted value, we rejigger those bids, we rejigger that spend amount, and the cycle kind of continues and continues on. The other thing I'll say, and we can talk about this in more detail if y'all want, but creative testing. I think creative is always going to be, right, a huge buzzword, huge topic in marketing. And for us, we've been able to figure out down to the individual creative level, even past campaign level, what types of creative drive the highest value users. And then we've been able to cycle those creatives in with more frequency, or put them more in other channels, or develop more variants of them. So I can tell you that one certain message is always going to bring in a higher value user than another type of message. And so we try and always optimize our creative mix so that we're generating higher and higher value customers.
I'm curious, like, so as you think about that, is it that your, like, the feedback loop from the conversion optimization is against the long-term value? So like you're using that as part of like the creative understanding. So you have to run for like at least a week where you get the predicted LTV and then
exactly.
back.
Yep, exactly.
Yeah, I think that's really smart, because I think, especially with kind of like generalized app campaigns, there was Peter Fader is a professor at Wharton, but there was like a paper that he wrote a long time ago that I'm just very familiar with, around how different acquisition channels lead to different lifetime values of types of customers. And it's like, it can be the channel, it can be the creative, it can be your targeting. And, generally speaking, like something actually I've heard Olivia say before, Google's really good at, you point and shoot them. This is what we need to do. They are going to do it. They will optimize to the events that you're asking them to optimize towards. Where it's trickier is, ad platforms generally have a lot of incentives that, sometimes are very aligned to your business. Sometimes they're not. And like, that's where I kind of think of like a trust but verify model. But I think everything you're saying completely makes sense and checks. Is how do you get these systems to work for you and in the way that grows your business? Because it's
100%.
so easy to optimize for outcomes that like they look great. And if, leadership told you, hey, Noah, I need 7 million app downloads next month, like we all kind of know there are very cheap ways of doing that may not lead to any actual customers. But that is something that you'd be able to do if need be.
Yeah, absolutely. The other thing I'll say with something that you guys have done that I think has been really helpful is, listen, I don't have a perfect tech stack. I don't have a perfect understanding of my data. I've been at this company for 1.5 years, and I just barely feel like I've wrapped my head around what we can do and what we can't do. So when y'all started out with us 1.5 years ago, we only had install level data. We didn't have all these fancy optimization events that we could pass to you. So for about 8 months, we ran all of our tests with you at install. And we all knew that wasn't like the most ideal outcome, but like it was enough to get us started and to get us some good directional reads. And then when we got registration, which again is that next event in the funnel, we passed that to you and you were able to back analyze or reanalyze all the tests we had already run at install, but reanalyze them at registration. And then we got kind of some more insights, and it wasn't as directional. It was actually really applicable and really precise and specific. And now we're actually about to start feeding y'all LTV-based events, which will be even more practical and more specific. And so it's really this crawl, walk, run model with us. And that's one of the things I appreciate most about y'all's partnership is it doesn't have to be perfect. You have a really good eye for what the good enough threshold, I call it. And then you're always pushing us to get more granular and more detailed in the data that we're passing to you.
Yeah, I think this is one of the, the really significant benefits, and I want to talk about House a little bit, but like of a system and infrastructure like ours, like we aren't like rerunning your analysis of like, okay, data scientists, go take it and run again. Our systems are backwards compatible with new data. So as data becomes available, or hey, we'd like to cut it in a different way, those, that kind of data backflow works really well with our systems and in an automated way, which is great. But which kind of like leads to I think the last formal question we have is what have been your key learnings in working with House? Like what have been some of the incrementality tests you've been most excited by, most surprised by? What have been we've worked together for 3 years. What have been some of the highlights?
Can I jump in? And I have a specific ask because I think this is a very interesting test. So I'm going to jump in and ask Noah, like practically, how did you learn that you were overspent on Google? Like everyone asks this question, like optimal spend level, how do I learn this? So I would ask like, how practically did you answer that question? And then I'm going to ask a follow-up and you can decline to answer if you would like, but I'm sure everybody wants to know, did the test reveal that you should include brand terms or exclude your brand terms? So you can opt out of answering that, but I know that that's going to be a big one.
Yeah, no, I'm happy to answer it. So like I said, we ran actually 3 different incrementality tests under Google. We probably ran too many tests, but I wanted to be really darn sure before I pulled way, way back in my spend that I needed to pull back. I really wanted multiple inputs. So we ran one test with y'all, we ran one test in combination with Google, and then we ran one Google only test. So we kind of got 3 different inputs. We all know Google does not have aligned incentives test, but we wanted to see what their incrementality test product would tell us, because if it was way off, maybe we needed to think about things differently. All 3 of those tests, regardless of methodology, regardless of whether we included brand or not, and I'll talk a little bit about the brand piece in a couple of minutes, but they all told us we were between really 30 and 35% incremental. So to me, that was like, okay, red alert, we've confirmed it. It's time to pull the hell back. So over the course of 2 weeks, every day we reduced spend by 10%. You never want to like shock the algorithm. So we tried to do it really gradually, but aggressively. So we did the max pullback that we felt like we reasonably could without fully resetting the algorithm, pushing everything back into learning mode. When we got down to where we thought we needed to get down, we actually realized that we were driving less volume than we thought we would have. So the spend went down and the volume went down. And we went back to you guys and we were like, hey, is this possible? Like, could we have somehow gotten more incremental over the course of the test? And you guys very correctly pointed out, like, hey, you ran that test at install, but now you have registration data. Let's look at how incremental you are at registration, right? Because we'd given you more data and more insights. We reran the results. It was super easy. I say we, it was you guys. I just got the answers from you. And it turned out we actually were a little bit more incremental at registration than we had been at install. And so we bumped spend back up a tiny bit. We got registration levels back to where they were before we had done the full spend pullback. And ultimately, then that was kind of our sweet spot, our Goldilocks spend amount. So we were able to spend 70% less and get the exact same number of weekly registrations that we'd been getting before the pullback. So that was kind of just tactically how we did it. To answer your second question about brand, when we were able to run the test where we excluded brand versus included brand, what turned out to be the case was that brand actually was more incremental than non-brand, which I was very surprised about because my mental model as a marketer is always that brand is going to be less incremental than non-brand. That could be for a couple of reasons. That could be because we're not a household name. And so running for our brand terms actually is important. But the actual reason I think it is, and this isn't proven, but this is my own personal hunch, is that we were getting conquested on our brand terms because Google actually created a new ad unit last year that allows brands to conquest each other in the Google Play Store for the very first time. And so when we turned off our brand ads, we were actually getting conquested by other brands. So it was a defense play for us to need to have those brand terms still on. And brand on its own actually was about 40% incremental, whereas non-brand was closer to 30. So we kept brand in, we have not turned brand off. And now we feel really good about our level of spend and the LTV per these users. Now, in my dream world, I would be able to control the amount of money spent on brand. Cannot do that because of Google. But we learned enough that we want to keep brand in our mix.
That's amazing. Because yeah, and this is why we test, right? Exactly as you said, it could be your business, it could be you're giving more features to the algorithm for better conversion optimization. There's a lot of reasons. And I think another point that you made that I just want to like underline as being such a good one is that slowly changing the amount you're spending so as not to shock the algorithms. I think that's something we see people get wrong in testing all the time is like there's companies out there who would suggest daily spend variability testing. And like the ad serving product manager in me is just like, that is the worst idea you can possibly imagine. But here we are. And this is what some people do. So testing in the right way is complicated, but doing it in a way where you're able to drive those kind of business outcomes and results you're looking for is so critical. So this was an awesome example. We do have some Q&A questions to get through. I'm going to quickly like wrap up with the conclusion because some folks will have to run at 11. But then if you have time, we can go a couple over.
Yeah, absolutely.
So before we end, my team's going to drop a link to register for our next open house with Rob. That's going to be amazing. Be sure to register. Also has a lot of hot takes, also has a lot of skepticism. I'd say he's potentially less optimistic than you are even. And as a former Google person, I appreciate I do think a lot of people there are trying their best. That being said, certain things are complicated and they only have the data that they have. And we'll also be sending the full recording to YouTube if anybody wants to watch there. So with that, kicking over to questions. First, Noah, do you use an MMM in your measurement stack? Why or why not?
Oh, you know what? I'm going to be honest that I am an MMM hater. And Olivia knows this about me because my internal data science team brings it up from time to time. I am an MMM hater specifically for businesses that are rapidly changing and or growing their user acquisition strategies. I think if you are, again, you're Nike, you've done the same thing for a long time, and now you're just fine tuning and tweaking different inputs, and maybe you launch a new TV commercial and you want to understand how that works. I think an MMM is awesome. But when you're constantly changing the channels, the spend, the messaging, the value propositions, even the product, we just came out with a brand new product. An MMM is not going to give me the answers I'm looking for because the inputs are too variable. So we do not use one right now. I'd love to get to a place where we can, but it's not the right product for me right now. And it would either take my internal team a year to build it, or it would take hundreds of thousands of dollars for me to pay to get access to one. And that's just not the right solution for me right now. So we use a combination of last click, direct attribution data through our MMP, incrementality testing through you guys. We almost at any given time have 1 to 2 tests going. And then we add on top of that things like post-purchase survey data. For us, it's post-registration data. So we survey every single one of our users and say, hey, where did you hear about TextNow? And we compare that data with our direct and last touch attribution data. And then we're also thinking through additional spend level testing and different kind of mixed modeling testing with you guys that is possible with just incrementality testing. You don't need to have a full MMM to get a sense for how your channels are working against each other. And maybe one day when we do have an MMM, the incrementality test results can be inputs into that model. But we're just not there to kind of need that model yet.
Yeah, I think, at least for me, this is something where I think as there's been a general movement towards MMM, because people are like, oh, these privacy durable tools, I think folks tend to underestimate what those tools were actually built to do. And they're just hoping like, oh yeah, like great, this is going to tell me how to spend my money. But the reality is like, often they were built as budget planning tools for an entire year on a relatively stable business. Whereas, so if you're growing really quickly or your allocations are changing or your product suites are changing, you're right, like, past is not necessarily indicative of future performance, whereas experiments are current and can create value in other ways.
Exactly, exactly. I will say we do use kind of a baby version of an MMM internally that our data scientists developed where, and I don't even think I talked to you guys about this that much, but they used past data. So we have it on a rolling 12-month cadence to look at and give us ranges or guides for roughly what they think we should spend based on the LTV of the users acquired through particular channels. And we kind of combine that with our own gut intuition and actual real-time data in the platforms to make kind of monthly spend allocations. So I use it like that. And that's been pretty helpful, but I would not use it to make all my decisions for me.
So it's sort of like a CAC to LTV-ish, like,
yeah.
hey, are we, which totally makes sense of like how you think about like, how you think about the long-term value of customers. And it's why like for a system like ours, having that registration data in or having that lifetime value data is so important because like, hey, we might be getting great installs and you get, we work with some companies who the CMO wants to see a lot of installs and the marketing leaders or the CEO might say that and the marketing leaders like you want installs, I'll show you installs, but that may or may not actually lead to customer value or revenue. So another question, this is a pretty tactical one, but what have been the inputs or the outputs that you're able to like, what are the adjustments you're able to make with PMAX? I know like obviously we did this brand exclusion, but somebody was just curious of like, can you upload exclusion lists, existing customers? Like what are kind of the inputs or the outputs that you're able to?
Yeah. So to be clear, I'm not doing PMAX. I know that's a really annoying nuance, but PMAX is specific to web. And then Google ACI is specific to mobile app. I just want to be super clear there. So I can't speak in great detail to PMAX. I need somebody else to educate me.
Algorithm is very similar.
But algorithm pretty similar. So you can apply term exclusions. You cannot do it yourself. Your Google rep has to do it for you on the back end, which always, makes me a little nervous because I don't want somebody else touching the ad campaigns who maybe doesn't work for me or has misaligned incentives. So, but you can do it. And that's how we did our brand excluded test. You can upload audience lists either for like lookalike or we use one for retargeting. So you can do that. The things you can't control are placements and keywords. So you cannot control where the ad shows up in the Google ecosystem. It could be YouTube. It could be the Play Store. It could be display. It could be anything in between. And then, like I said, you can't control what terms you land on. So Google could literally be spending 99% of my budget on defending my brand terms and 1% on non-brand term acquisition. Not only do I not have control over that, I don't know. They will not tell you the amount that you spend on different terms or even brand terms versus non-brand terms. So that's really for me the rub. That's the challenge is I don't have any control or insight into that. So my theory about us being conquested is simply a theory. I'll never know that for sure.
Yeah, I mean, go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to say so to repeat it back, it's like you will use the MMP to feed these values through Google and let them bid on these things. And then you use House, which is connected to your back end to validate that the events you're sending to Google are indeed what they are going and finding.
Exactly.
I worked with a very large advertiser when I was at Google once who it wasn't with UAC because they wouldn't buy UAC because they just thought it was crappy inventory. But they were buying video action campaigns, which also would very clearly tell you where your advertising was going. And they threatened to pull all spend unless we gave them placement lists. So I was responsible for building a like terabyte placement list profile for them, which was like a comical amount of data for their product and engineering team. I shared it to them in BigQuery and I was just like, hey, what are you guys going to do with this? They're like, we have no idea. Will you create a like classification algorithm for us? We're like, no, we just did this for you. So Olivia, you may or may not have worked for that company.
Oh, but here's my hot take. Noah, Google UAC is still your highest spend channel, right?
Not anymore.
Oh, really? Okay. Is it close?
It's our second highest.
Okay.
Yeah.
So this is why I think there's just Google has left such a bad taste in advertisers' mouth that people are moving their budgets away when like in reality, it does work and it can drive a business, and it's probably the top 3, if not top 2, or the single most important channel. And so that's what's so interesting is that, I've seen a lot of advertisers say like, I'm boycotting this inventory, I'm not buying it, when in reality, it's like a huge missed opportunity. And again, it's back to Zach's point. It's like trust, but verify. I'm like, the answer to me is not like turn off Google, or don't buy UAC, which is what this advertiser that Zach is alluding to was just not buying it because they were like, oh, we can't validate it.
Right.
No, I have another good question for you. With increasing privacy regulations such as GDPR and CCPA, planned rollout of third-party, like deprecation of third-party cookies, methods of tracking users is really being strained. How are you thinking, like, what are you thinking for what measuring marketing effectiveness in campaigns is going to look like? Like, what do you think the future of that world embodies?
Yeah. Well, I always tell my team that the best thing we can do as marketers is be able to look around the like proverbial corner of what's coming next and anticipate it and be an early adopter of things, be an early tester, try things out before they're required. So I just want to say, like, as a whole, in aggregate, with user level privacy being being promoted and individual level identifiers being deprecated, I want to try things now because I want to know what's going to happen in 6 months when they turn those cookies off. So we're constantly testing with our MMP different solutions and different betas for that reduced level of information and that granularity. In general, though, I will say, I think I remember in 2020, there was a lot of panic about iOS 14.5 and a lot of fear and a lot of confusion. And frankly, maybe this is my hot take for the day. I think some of that was just due to Apple being like really bad at communicating what was going to happen. But there was all this fear and panic. And listen, like, we've persevered. We've made it work. We're here now. Everybody's spending. We're growing our budgets. It didn't end the world of marketing. It just adapted. And we as marketers have to be the people doing the adapting. So now when we look at what's going to happen on the Android or the Google side of things, I'm trying to take what we learned from iOS and apply it here. So constant testing, early testing, going to thought leaders like you guys and other partners and trying to come up with what we all think is the best solution, reevaluating my tech stack and seeing if there's something else I need or something I need to replace because there's a better option out there that is in closer contact with Apple or Google or has more insight or has a smarter staff. But ultimately, and I sound like a commercial for House right now, but incrementality testing, that is the tried and true way to understand what's happening without user level identification. There's no world in which privacy legislation or restriction, no matter how severe it is, will ever take away from the benefit and the ground truth of causal inference testing. And so for me, it's just doubling down on what we've already done, making sure we test our Android specific campaigns really robustly before this deprecation happens. And then staying tight. I come to you guys all the time and I'm like, who's the smartest person doing X? Who's your best client doing Y? And asking those questions and making sure I'm guiding my team to the right solutions and answers, I think is kind of how I'm trying to stay ahead of things.
On this, actually, question for me is a general hypothesis that I have and have sort of seen come to reality is that with IDFA deprecation, post ATT, a lot of companies are going to say, hey, we sit on top of first party data. Why don't we try to build an ads business and take the 10% margin on the top, whether it's Uber starting ads, Discord starting ads, Reddit, pushing forward in ads. Are you optimistic about some of these other channels, like, whether in the short term or in the long run? Because like it's like a very natural progression, and I think something we're going to be seeing is a lot of companies saying we have first party data too, and when tracking isn't as good for anybody, it can make the tracking better, the relative difference better for everyone.
Yeah. This is a good question. And as you know, TextNow has ads in the app, although we've always had them. That's how we've made money as a business. That's how we're able to make our product free for our customers. So as I am a big champion of first party data and figuring out how to monetize your first party data in a privacy safe way. That said, for these other companies, so I'll use Uber as an example, it is not within your habit or your behavior as a user to be scrolling Uber or looking at Uber enough that there is a reason for you to have an ad interaction. I think channels like that are placing ads within their app are sometimes not doing it in a way that is connected or conducive to user behavior. And that's where I have a lot of skepticism. I will not buy ads there. I also won't buy ads on Reddit, for example. I love Reddit. I feel like I am a Reddit power user. I'm on Reddit every single day as an individual, but I don't have a profile. I don't give them my data. I don't share information about myself on there. I use it to like read what other people are ordering at Domino's and like figure out what I should order at Domino's, right? So like for me, the ad experience there, it's not conducive to the user behavior. Now, I do think there's plenty of times when these new ad channels are coming up with ad inventory that is really conducive to user behavior. So, for example, I think some of the CTV platforms that have come up recently are doing a really good job at that and are putting ads in their product in a way that is not disruptive, but is unskippable, perhaps. But that's not going to be the case for every single ad platform.
It's great. Great ad formats. That's, great ad formats, great inventory. And then if the tracking, causal measurement, it all works. So last question, unless Olivia's got anything else, is just curious, are you using the results of the incrementality test as a gut check for the platforms or more? Like, are there other things that you're kind of doing with this data, or like applying the coefficients to campaign results or anything else?
Yeah, so we definitely apply the results. We use the incrementality test results really as our real source of truth on measurement. We still use what the platforms give us, right? We use that to make kind of like day-to-day spend up, spend down decisions. But we bring those incrementality factors also into our internal reporting. So they live in a table where I see like actual platform level spend, platform level reported results, apply the incrementality factor, incremental results, incremental cost per install. So it's really enmeshed within my internal data. But I will also say something that we haven't touched on yet that I think is worth saying is it's not like we test once and that's Bible forever. We retest. I try to retest everything at least every 6 months. So we're actually getting ready to launch another Google test. Now that we have our new optimization event, we're going to get that ramped up, and then we're going to retest and retest and retest. So it's kind of like the campaign level data that's reported in the platform is what I would call my daily decision-making data. And then the incrementality factors from y'all are kind of the weekly and monthly level decisions. And we need those to refresh every couple of months so that they're accurate, because lots can change. We can change, the market can change, competitive landscape can change. So it's the combination of those two together.
I think people don't appreciate how much things change. Just like, oh, like this should be the way forever. Whereas I think back to me being a product manager, I was changing stuff constantly and just being like, hey, this makes my internal metrics look really good. Hopefully it works for advertisers. I guess we'll find out.
Yes, and often they don't tell you when things change. So
No.
the only reason I know about this new Google product that allowed other people to cannibalize us is because I found it in one email one time that they sent out 1 year ago saying, hey, coming soon will be a new ad unit. They didn't say it would be used for cannibalization. They just mentioned that there would be this ad unit. And if I hadn't gone back and combed through my emails and found that, I'd still be scratching.
It's very generous of them to send you an email. I didn't do that.
It was them doing me a favor.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much, Noah. Really appreciate it. This was great, and enjoy the rest of your week.
Absolutely. Thank you guys.
Noah, thanks everyone.
Thanks, Olivia. Thanks, everyone.